Today we are going to talk about the defined term works within FIDIC Red Book across 4 decades. As you are aware, FIDIC has undergone 4 different versions during 4 decades, starting from 1977 up to 2017. So the first version, actually the third version of FIDIC, is FIDIC 1977 version. Then it came to the FIDIC 1987 version, which is the 4th edition. Again, it was evolved into FIDIC 1999, which is within the Rainbow Suite, as the first edition of the new suite. And then in 2017, they issued the 2nd edition of the new Red Book. The word works has got a clear and precise definition within the 2017 version. However, in order to come into that level, the FIDIC has to undergo certain changes into that particular definition, which was defined in 1977 version. As you can see here, FIDIC 1977 version defined the works as both the permanent works and the temporary works. Now, let me explain you what will be the problem that you will face if you are talking the word works as both the permanent and the temporary works. Now, as you all know, the substantial completion defines the completion of the works to an extent where the employer can step into the site. The same employer can enjoy the facility. The employer can acquire the site. Now, assume that you are going to do a road stretch, and during that road construction, in order to have an alternative transport route, you are constructing a temporary road. Now, towards the end of this completion period, suppose there's a flood which has occurred, and all of a sudden, the permanent works pertaining to the road as well as the temporary road has been damaged. Now, you are at the edge, you are at the 11th hour of handing over this particular site to the employer. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to do the repair works for both the temporary works and the permanent works? Now, from the sustainability point of view, it is worthless that if you are going to do repair works to the temporary works, because you are going to enjoy this facility upon completion of the permanent works. Therefore, the contractor will concentrate on completing the permanent works, and then he will ignore that part of the temporary works. Right? Therefore, if you use the definition as the works, which will define as both the permanent works and the temporary works, the contractor may have to do the temporary works as well, which is not the sensible thing to do. FIDIC identified that there will be a problem based on this particular definition. So, in 1987 version, they have changed that particular definition as temporary works. The works means permanent works and the temporary works, or either of them as appropriate. So that means this particular application, and towards the end of the project, in order to hand over the project, you can easily apply. Then in 1999 version, the word works has been defined in the same fashion as the FIDIC Red Book in 1987 version. However, there was additional comma which has been added. It means the permanent works and the temporary works, or either of them as appropriate, but there was a comma in between that O and the works. What does this mean? You know, in a sentence, when you separate a sentence within a comma, it is something very similar to that you pause when you are talking in order to emphasize the facts, in order to cluster the facts. This is the only thing which has happened in the change which has occurred in FIDIC 99 and 2017 versions. Right. Going back into the cluster of permanent works and temporary works, it is very similar to something like you are clustering the numbers, odd numbers and even numbers. You know that there is a mathematical operation which is called the Venn diagrams. Presenting Venn diagrams, the word and represents the cluster, right? It represents the unity. It represents the union which has been occurred between the numbers, odd numbers and even numbers, which will form the full set of numbers. But they are distinct, isn't it? So by using the word works as either permanent works or temporary works as appropriate, gives you the privilege to the drafter to separate them and treat them in a different way. It is like an employee, right? In an organization, if you are talking in terms of an employee, if you are mentioning someone as an employee, he or she may be a male employee or female employee. Now, when it comes to formal dresses, right, you may have to define the formal dresses pertaining to the male employee in a different way and the female employee in a different way, because you cannot define in one single scenario for these two separate cases. This is the beauty of separating the permanent works and the temporary works within the definition. Again, the word works in the modern scenario means, in the FIDIC grade book, permanent works and temporary works. It will be one scenario, or either of them as appropriate, like I have explained you within the completion of the project. Now I hope you understood what is exactly meant by the word works, which is defined within the FIDIC grade book across 4 decades. Now, let us understand what exactly is meant by the permanent works in this scenario. You might think that the permanent works are the works which will sustain within the site, the works which will be left behind by the contractor towards the end of the project. However, there is a certain modification into this particular definition, because there are certain form work which are called as sacrificial form work, right? You have to keep that form work at site when you leave the site, right? Mostly this is happening when you are doing an underground construction, right? When you are doing a piling work, sometimes you may have to use some form work in the areas where the soil is weak, wherein once you do the concrete, you cannot take out the form work out of the site. Therefore, defining permanent works as the works which you leave behind when you go out of the site has got a certain modification to be done, right? It is actually the works of permanent nature, because you know the purpose of a form work is to keep the concrete or particular structure intact at the time of concreting, and in order to support that until it gains the specific strength. After that, that particular use of the formwork has gone. But you cannot take that particular formwork out of the site. Therefore, the definition for the permanent works is the works of permanent nature which you leave behind when you go out of the site. The definition for the temporary works is that whatever the ancillary works that you wanted to do in order to complete the permanent works, either it can be a formwork which is needed to be done on the ground or under the ground. It may not be sacrificial or it may be sacrificial. This is how the works has been defined in a way that the permanent works has been identified separately and the temporary works have been identified separately, because for the ease of administration purpose. Now let us take into account another scenario. As you are aware, in FIDIC 1999 version, the clause 10.4 says that the issuance of the taking of the over certificate does not mean that you approve that all the disturbances which has been done related to the site has been approved. Okay, so this gives some sort of a implied meaning that the example which I have given to you, right, the substantial completion of the road means that the employer is able to use this facility, right? But it does not do any harm if you do not complete that particular temporary road. However, you have a professional responsibility, and it is also stated within the FIDIC Red Book that you have to reinstate in a later date, right, in order to keep the facility intact. When you are using the facility, that you have to reinstate the disturbances that you have done to the surroundings. So you cannot just go away by not doing that temporary work, but in terms of the sustainability point of view, a temporary road towards the end of the project, it's not necessarily needed to be kept in good condition because its usage has gone. Perhaps you may have to take it out, perhaps you may have to use it for another purpose. However, it is as per the content which is stated within the contract, because clause 10.4, it is very specifically mentioned unless it is specified. You cannot say that the taking over certificate does not mean that the completion or reinstatement of all the works are included within that one. But the permanent works, yes, because this is the one which is being considered within the taking over certificate, the completion of the permanent works. Now I hope you understood and you got an insight about the definition works, which starts from capital W and ends with an S, which appears all over the FIDIC Red Book in all 4 versions, which has to be distinguished from any other places where the works have been defined without the capital W and the S.